Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. We are here today because on September 8th, 2021, defendant, Bree Kuhn, locked her husband, Colin Turner, in the garage of their home. Colin then called 911 for help. As he's on a recorded phone call with 911, the defendant opens the door to their garage and shoots him 4 times in the back while he's on the phone. Now, I anticipate this week that you'll hear a lot about their relationship, their marriage. They've been married for several years. They had 2 small children together. They had a young boy, 4 years old, named John Patrick. We called him JP. And they had a 3-year-old girl named Lainey. Ms. Kuhn also had a 12-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, Kylie. So Bree and Colin have the 3 children, 2 of them together. One is just Ms. Bree's. At the time of this incident, Ms. Kuhn was in the Navy. She was a chief, and she was working full-time and was acting as the primary breadwinner in the relationship. Colin was a retired Marine who was in school at the time. I believe he was studying engineering. And he primarily was a stay-at-home dad with the 2 small ones, the 3-year-old and the 4-year-old. That was the dynamic of their relationship. And as happens in many relationships, I think you'll see that there were frictions between the different requirements for a working full-time parent and a stay-at-home parent. And the relationship worsened. On the day of the incident, September 8th, 2021, you're going to hear that law enforcement went out multiple times to their residence that day. And you'll see and hear both the defendant and Colin speaking with law enforcement about what is happening. Eventually, you'll see both of their perspectives. So, around 1 o'clock, or 12:54 to be precise, the defendant calls 911. She says that her husband has thrown her down. The sheriff's office sends out 2 units, deputies Stephen Quick and Wes Hartberger. As they arrive, Colin is sitting outside, and you'll see all this on the body cams. So Colin is sitting outside on the edge of the driveway in a little sort of fishing chair or lawn chair, and the defendant is inside. And so the 2 deputies go and speak with them separately. So Colin tells the deputies, the deputies ask him, why are we here? Why is she calling 911? And Colin starts to tell him, give him some sort of background about some of the defendant's mental health problems and a suicide attempt she'd had. I'll come back to that. But then he talks about the more recent problems, and he says basically this started last night. We were, sort of arguing. She was wanting to watch the television late at night, and she kept turning up the volume, and I was asking her to turn it down, and kind of a back and forth. She wanted to watch the TV at a high volume. So eventually he says I disconnected the Wi-Fi so she couldn't watch the TV, and then he says, then she put my laptop in the dishwasher, and you'll see it's kind of sort of petty back and forth. And you'll see the relationship is not in a good state at that point. So, and then he says, she took my credit cards. Obviously, he's not the breadwinner in the relationship. And he says, I just want to leave. I want to take the kids. I just want to go to Georgia to my parents. And that, you'll see throughout the course of the trial, that was the sticking point. He wanted to leave with the kids. He didn't want him to take the kids. And he tells them, look, I would just leave, but I don't want to leave the kids here with her. So now the deputies go in and they talk to the defendant, and first thing she says, and really Every time, the first thing she says is, he's going to take my kids. Normally she says, my kids, not our kids, it's my kids. He's going to take my children. He wants to go to Georgia. She then tells the deputy basically what she had relayed on 911, that he pushes her up against the doorway and pushes her down in the mountain. And the deputy's asking her, Deputy Hartberger, do you have any marks, any redness, anything like that? Anybody see it? Basically trying to seek some kind of corroboration as to what happened. And she doesn't have any marks. She's unable to give any corroboration. No other witnesses. Obviously, you've got the two little toddlers running around. And so you'll see during this part of this conversation, she's saying, he's taking my kids, he pushes me down, and then she adds in, and you'll see it on the body cam, as almost sort of a side comment, she says, he rapes me over the weekend. You'll see that Deputy Hartberger either didn't catch it or didn't even acknowledge it, because she's talking about this pushing incident. And she just sort of adds this part. But I think you'll see during the course of the conversation, her main focus is, he's taking my children. And so the two deputies explain to both parties that this is as to the children, they can't get involved. They're legally married. They're the biological parents of both children. They explain to both parties, we cannot stop either one of you from taking the children. You'll see on the body cams that, again, Colin, he's sort of sitting outside on the driveway in the garage. Then it comes out, and you've got the two trucks in the driveway. Colin's red truck, I can't remember what kind of truck, and her white Traverse. You see on the body cam, the defendant comes out, and she starts unloading items from Colin's truck into her own. Because she said, I'm leaving, I'm taking the kids. You'll see she gets out one car seat and is putting it into hers so that she can leave with the children. And that's what she's telling the deputies. So both parties are wanting to leave with the children. You'll also see, I believe, right before the police arrive, you're going to see a cell phone video that the defendant took. And some of it's hard to hear, because obviously, especially towards the end, it looks like she's got the camera sort of down by her leg, the view sort of upside down, showing the back of her leg. And she's talking with Colin. And you'll hear their back and forth, and at that point she seems upset about that he won't talk to her. Why won't you talk to me? Why won't you talk to me? He's responding, I tried to talk to you last night, and he doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't yell, he just sounds sort of fed up. I tried to talk to you, and this sort of you'll hear their back and forth, and it's important to keep in mind that this is her recording him. He's not yelling, he's not angry, he's just saying, look, doesn't sound like he wants to talk to her. So the police leave, and shortly after that, she locks Colin outside. He's outside in the driveway. He calls her and ends up speaking with her naval commanding officer. You'll hear from him. He tells them, she's cut off all my finances. I have no access to any of the money. And the defendant speaks with him as well. It's a man named Craig Forehand. He was with the commanding officer of the Navy. So he speaks with both parties. He's going to tell you he spoke with both of them. They both seem calm. They both seem rational. And they were both expressing frustration. Colin is frustrated that she's cut off finances. She's talking about him taking the kids. And you'll see that his level of concern was fairly low. Both parties seem fairly high. So anyway, Colin's out in the driveway. At some point, Laney wakes up. The defendant takes a 3-year-old girl out to Colin to get her to calm down. She's crying. She's crying. So Colin now has 3-year-old Laney, but again, she won't let him back in the house. So now he's outside in the driveway, this 3-year-old child. It's September, it's hot. She won't let him back in the house. So now Colin calls 911. 4:58 p.m. He calls 911 and says, "My wife has locked me out. I'm out here with my 3-year-old daughter." You'll hear her, well, I was going to say in the background, but it's more the foreground really. She's crying, she's upset, and he's trying to calm her down. So police respond again. Deputy Jameson Lynn responds. And again, he has conversation with both parties. And you'll see he sort of bounces back and forth between them. And eventually, like you'll see his interaction with both of them. Colin relates to him what I've just told you. This is a continuation from earlier. I'm locked out. She won't let me in my own house. And he explains to Colin, it's your house. And however you need to get in, you can. You can break into your own home. You can't be locked out of your own home. Then he speaks with the defendant. And again, the first thing she says is, he's taking my kids. She then relates the incident that she had talked about earlier, him pushing her down. And you can tell she's frustrated. Because multiple times she says, he told me not to talk to her. He told me not to talk to her. And the deputy is explaining to her, you can't lock him out. He lives here. He has a right to get into the house. Similar with the children. Both of them have a right to the children. Both of them have a right to the house. He's trying to. Again, you'll see their interaction. What I think you'll see is she's frustrated. The police aren't helping. Again, they can't keep somebody out of the house. And she's frustrated because he won't talk. Colin won't talk to her. Again, he's taking her kids in her mind. He's taking my children. And Deputy Lynn tries to sort of propose some compromises to her, but she doesn't really seem interested. So, and eventually, she agrees to let him in the house, and Deputy Lynn departs the scene. Shortly thereafter, now she locks him outside in the garage. This time without any children. So he's out in the garage, she's inside the residence with the 3 children. So Colin again calls 911. Says, "You guys have been out here twice already. Now I'm locked in the garage. My wife won't let me in the house." He says, she broke the doors, and then when I came out here to try and fix the garage doors, she locked me out. I can't get back in my own house. And you'll hear his tone, how he's speaking. He's calm. He's not shouting. He's not yelling. He's not cursing. He's very calm. He's very rational. He sounds probably just more exasperated than anything, the whole situation. And then you'll hear, as he's talking, literally in mid-sentence, you hear a loud bang. And it's shocking in its suddenness, to the point that the 911 operator asks, you can tell how surprised she is. She asks, "What was that?" Because there's no context. The calm, rational conversation, then bang. "What was that?" she asks. And Colin has just enough time to say one more sentence before his life is ended. He has just enough time to say, "She just shot me." And then you hear bang, bang, bang in quick succession. The line stays open. And the 911 operator is trying to get a response from Colin. "Sir, are you there? Sir, are you there? Please respond." There's no response. Eventually, about 5 or 6 minutes later, right toward the end of the call, you hear the defendant. She leaves after shooting her husband, but a few minutes later comes back. She says to try and render aid. Colin was well beyond help at that point. She made sure shot. You'll see his injuries. You'll hear the descriptions of his injuries. The physical evidence is going to show you that Colin is sitting in the garage on this little Yeti cooler, probably about 8 or 10 feet from the door. You'll see the pictures. Sitting there on this little Yeti cooler with his back to the door on the phone with 911. It's a very easy target. You'll see where she shoots him. One shot hits him in the upper back, comes out his neck, ends up in his wrist. 2 more right in the back, exit through his chest. Another one right in the back, those are covered from his chest. You hit both the lungs and the heart. He made sure what she was doing. He's sitting there an easy target. But it would seem that a short time later, reality set in. She probably realized what she had done. I just killed my husband. She goes back to try and help him, but he was very likely dead. She goes to the neighbors, takes her children to the neighbors, and you'll hear about her interactions there. And obviously deputies swarmed to the scene. Obviously they know exactly what's happened because Colin was on the phone. So a huge amount of deputies start showing up, and you hear the defendant is making statements, I shot my husband. She makes a statement of, he was going to take my kids, I shot my husband. That was her reasoning. Yeah. He was taking her kids. Her kids. You'll see on the body cams, and you'll see, right afterwards, she looks like it. She's in shock. She's kind of standing weird. And reality has set in as to what she just did. She just killed her husband for no reason while he's sitting there with his back to it. So she is taken to the Major Crimes Unit, where she is interviewed by Detectives Rao and Detective Kelly. And you'll see her recorded interview. I will say that it was cold in there. They had the AC blast in those offices, and so they bring in a little space heater for her. Unfortunately, the space heater is very, very loud, and so for the first, I would say, 12 or 13 minutes, she's a little hard to hear. She's kind of soft-spoken, and the space heater is blasting. Eventually, they turn it off. But you can hear everything. But I will say that the first time you listen to it, you may not pick up everything she says. But I do want to advise you that all evidence that is admitted, body cams, pictures, 911 calls, physical exhibits, everything that is admitted, you will get to take back with you into the jury room when you deliver. So please don't be concerned if you didn't catch something or if you didn't hear something. Like I said, especially that first portion, you may need to listen again to be able to hear it. You can't hear it again. So she starts out with them, basically running through, the sequence of the day. Police came out. He pushed me to the ground. She says, I locked him out so that he wouldn't take my children. And then she says, police came out again. I let him back inside, and I locked him out in the garage. And then they're asking her about, what happened to Colin. Her version at that point is that I went to the door. He tried to force his way in. He was kicking me. They have this physical altercation. She says he was going to kill me. So I shot him as he's coming at me. Now, the detectives, they've heard the 911 call. They know exactly the circumstances of how Colin was killed. And it certainly wasn't during a physical altercation while he's kicking her and coming at her. That's what she tells them. They continue to ask her questions, and you'll see that, especially towards the end, a lot of the questions she does not want to answer. She either sidesteps, ducks completely. You'll see probably 4 or 5 times they ask her, what was he doing when you went out there? Where was he standing? What was he doing? Did he have anything in his hands? Every time, she ducks the question. Now, you will see why she ducks the question. Because Colin was sitting there with his back to the door with an arm one. But she can't tell the police that. So she keeps just dodging the question. Because in her version, he's attacking her. Detective Grau asks her, why did you go out there with the gun? Okay. Obviously, she had the gun when she went to the door. She says, I just wanted to go. No, she didn't. He was locked out. She's inside with the children. She did not have a good reason for going to the door. But we know the reason. She went to the door to kill Colin. So I'll ask you to contrast her versions, her testimony, her statements, with some of the physical evidence in the case. You'll see there is a huge chasm between what the evidence shows and the version that she wants to claim. Now that is the bulk of the state's case, and that the state will show that she killed her husband with premeditation. Now once that happens, I will rest, and at that point the defense can present evidence if they so choose, and if they don't have to, as we talked about yesterday. And typically I don't comment because I don't like to talk about things that I don't control. However, in this case, I feel very confident the defense will call at least one witness. So, as we talked about yesterday, I expect the defense will call Dr. Julie Harper, psychologist. And she met with the defendant probably half a dozen times over the course of several months. And the defendant gave her many detailed stories about a great variety of topics. And Dr. Harper is then going to relate to you some of these things the defendant told her. And they're going to be quite shocking to hear. Because the things that the defendant is saying about her husband are terrible. They're hard to hear. She's telling Dr. Harper, and Dr. Harper will then relate to you, that Colin has been raping her. He put the dog through the drywall. He's threatening to drown all the children. That he wants to kill his wife so that he can murder all these children. Some of the logic gets a little hard to follow, honestly. But just really shocking stuff that may elicit an emotional response from you. Because it's shocking allegations. Two things important to keep in mind. A, what is the source of all those allegations? And what you'll see is that it's simply her telling the doctor all these things that happened. Obviously, with Colin gone, there's nobody to contradict her versions.
Your Honor, can we approach?
You may.
So you'll see that the source of all these stories is what the defendant is telling Dr. Harper. Dr. Harper will then relate it to you. The evidence will also show that there is no verification or documentation of any of these allegations. Just what she's telling Dr. Harper. Now, I also expect that Dr. Harper will talk about sort of the defendant's history, and the evidence will show that Ms. Kuhn has a long history of depression and anxiety going all the way back to when she was a child, including her first suicide attempt at the age of 13. Obviously, all of these issues predate her relationship with Colin. And Dr. Harper will talk about the issues she faced in the lead-up to what happened. We'll hear about that in April, Ms. Kuhn attempted suicide and was admitted for about 10 days at that point to a psychiatric hospital. And then the following month, she was admitted again, I think this time for about 7 days. This time it was not a suicide attempt, but she went to the ER with suicidal ideations. And you'll see that at these times she's reporting sort of the stressors that she has in her life, which primarily seem to do with work. She's had a lot of issues at work, and she also blames Colin for interfering at work, sort of causing trouble for her at work. At one point he calls about that, she's being hazed, and he calls about that she's working 50 hours. But he's causing trouble. She feels that he's ruining the reputation that she's built at her work. So all these, you'll see, are the reasons for these psychiatric hospitalizations, the suicide attempt. No point does she ever report any kind of physical abuse, sexual abuse, threats to the children, anything. Again, she is in therapy multiple times a week. This doesn't work. She also relates to Dr. Harper, and I expect Dr. Harper will convey to you her version of what happened with Colin when she killed him. And you'll see that this version is radically different. Now she claims that she went out to the garage with a gun because she intended to commit suicide. She tells Dr. Harper that she put the gun under her chin. Colin gave her a thumbs up while he's on the phone, and she was so shocked by his nonchalant attitude that she lowered the gun in surprise and then accidentally shot him right in the back. She then claims that Colin said, "You're fucking dead," and charges at her, and she shoots him again. Again, the evidence is going to show that this is a radically different version than what she told the police, and is radically different than what the physical evidence shows. The evidence is also going to show you that Dr. Harper did not really attempt to question her or challenge her on any of these discrepancies or changes. And what you'll see is that Dr. Harper simply accepted everything that Bree told her. You also hear from, or I anticipate you'll hear, from the defendant's brother. He's going to tell you that he was on the phone with his sister during this incident. He's going to relate to you that he heard Colin attacking her, Colin assaulting her, Colin kicking her, and that he then hears gunshots. Again, you'll have the 911 recording of what happened, and so you'll be able to compare the two and make up your own minds. After that, the state will go into what we call rebuttal, which is the state gets to address evidence the defense has put on. So at that point, the state will also call the psychologist, Dr. McDonald, like we talked about yesterday. And again, similar to Dr. Harper, she reviewed your medical records, from both the civilian hospital, the military hospital. She met with Ms. Kuhn on numerous occasions, and she will relate to you her conversations with Bree Kuhn. She also talked with Bree about what happened, and she basically told her, I'm not really sure. At this point, she said, I'm not really sure what's real and what's not. But she still thought she shot him in the chest. But she didn't seem to, at that point, she seemed to claim to not remember what happened. So you see the progression in her stories. Then you'll see Dr. McDonald will also talk about, as will Dr. Harper, they're both going to talk about battered spouse syndrome. What it entails, characteristics, and how it applies to self-defense, and how it applies to Bree Kuhn. And as you might guess, I anticipate that Dr. Harper will say, yes, she's a battered spouse. Dr. McDonald will say, in her opinion, she's not consistent with a battered spouse. I anticipate that either Dr. Harper or Dr. McDonald will tell you about some of the characteristics of a battered spouse. You'll see that many of them were not consistent with Bree Kuhn's either behavior or situation. A typical component of a battered spouse is that the person can be helpless to exit the relationship. They don't have a way out of the relationship. The doctor is going to relate to you, and you'll see from Bree Kuhn's situation that she absolutely had a way out. She claimed that she had a meeting with divorce attorneys the following day. She told multiple of the deputies that. She absolutely had a way out of the relationship. The doctors will also tell you about another component of battered spouse can be financial. That the battered spouse is financially relying upon their abuser. That was not Bree's situation. She was the breadwinner. The doctors will also relate to you, another common component of battered spouse is that the abuser will isolate the victim, cut them off. You don't have friends or family or options, nobody to turn to besides their abuser. That's a common component of battered spouse. And that was not, the evidence to show you that is not the situation that Bree Kuhn was in. She had plenty of family, she had plenty of support, she had the military. She was in therapy. All these things you can look at in terms of what consists of battered spouse. And obviously the doctors will give you their opinions. I anticipate Dr. McDonald will give you her opinion. She is not a battered spouse. But again, as Mr. Etheridge said yesterday, disproving a negative can be difficult. So she's not going to give you a definitive answer because she was not there. But the evidence will show that both doctors examined Bree Kuhn and reached different conclusions. But Dr. Harper, I would ask you to pay close attention to a lot of things she says and how she says them. The details matter. The state will also call likely several other witnesses that will, mostly law enforcement, that talk to Colin that day, and you'll see the body cams of their interactions with Colin. I anticipate that will take most through Thursday. We'll see how it's going to be difficult to judge these things, but that's what I anticipate. Ms. Kuhn is charged with one count of first-degree premeditated murder, as the judge explained to you. On Thursday or Friday, we will go through the elements of that charge, the things the state has to prove. It is important to note that, as Mr. Etheridge, as we both said yesterday, battered spouse syndrome is not a defense in and of itself, but it's as it relates to self-defense. The judge will give you the self-defense instruction, and obviously we will discuss it at length. You're going to hear from a good number of witnesses during this trial. You hear from some of the neighbors that had contact with the defendant. You'll hear with law enforcement that showed up at the scene. You'll hear from 911. You'll hear from the medical examiner, detectives. You'll see a large amount of video, body cams. We've given 911 calls, pictures. Again, all the physical exhibits you get to take back with you. So, as with any trial, it's important that you pay attention and the details will matter. Now, it's important to note that as we go into closings on Friday, so we'll wrap up everything. And ultimately, it will be your decision. What the evidence is going to show you is that as this relationship broke down, the defendant, the primary concern was he's taking my kids. And Colin had flat out told her, because of all these psychiatric issues and you attempting suicide, custody battle is not going to go well for you. She knew that. And she knew that if he takes those kids to Georgia, well, she will see them again. That was her driving motivation that day. She's going to lose her kids. The evidence will show she locks him in the garage, shoots him in the back while he's on the phone with 911. Not in self-defense, not without justification. She murdered her husband. The evidence will show that since then, she has been attempting to justify what she did and explain and give reasons for that 911 call. She can't do it. The evidence will show this was not an act of self-defense. She acted with premeditation and murdered the husband. I'll ask you to find the defendant guilty of first-degree premeditated murder.
Mr. Etheridge?
May it please the court. Good morning, how y'all doing? Thanks for coming back. Sometimes after jury selection, people listen to me for a while and they say, I'm not coming back to listen to that anymore. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Like we talked about yesterday, other than military service, this is the highest civic duty you can do. And this is democracy in action, okay? This is what makes our country so great. I appreciate it. My partner, Jim Barnes, appreciate it. And most importantly, this young lady right here appreciates it. Because you're giving her what she asked for, her days in court, okay? And no matter what your decision is at the end of this week, we want to thank you for being here today for your service. Now, the prosecution has laid out what this particular portion of the proceedings is. It's kind of like a roadmap of where we're going to go, okay? The prosecution, because they have the burden of proof, they go first, okay? That's their case in chief. Afterwards, the defense, should we choose to do so, we put on our case in chief. As the prosecutor mentioned earlier, they will have a rebuttal, and we have closing arguments. Judge Duncan's going to give you the final instructions. Finally, you get to do your job, okay? If you will, though, try to listen as we go through this. A lot of the information that we're going to be deriving comes from cross-examination by me and direct examination by Mr. Barnes, who's going to handle the bulk of our case in chief. Please remember, as we go through this, as you listen to these witnesses, the presumption of innocence, which remains with Bree throughout the entire proceedings, until and unless, after everything's done, you've heard everything from both sides, jury instructions, arguments, until you're convinced beyond exclusion of every reasonable doubt that she did what this prosecutor claims she did. So please try to keep an open mind. Another thing the judge is going to tell you, don't leave your common sense outside the door when you walk in here today, when you're going through this. Now, I know this prosecutor well enough to know he's not going to intentionally mislead you. I'm sure not going to do that, and neither is Jim Barnes. But this is an adversarial process, okay? They've got their version of the facts. We've got our version of the facts, okay? And I want you to listen carefully as we go through this and listen to the questions I'm asking, the responses we're getting, the questions that Jim's going to pose to our witnesses probably late tomorrow, and the answers they give as well as these experts. And remember, the burden of proof remains with the prosecution. That can come from what we're going to hear today, tomorrow, the evidence, by way of exhibits, testimony, a lack of evidence, what you're not going to hear, and a conflict in evidence. Prosecutors already told you we've got conflicts in the evidence already from the get-go. Remember, all you got to do is find one reasonable doubt, and you're going to have to vote not guilty if you follow the law that Judge Duncan's going to give you. Okay? Remember what my client is charged with. First degree, premeditated murder. As we go through this testimony, think to yourself, what kind of person calls the police out to their house if they're going to commit a premeditated murder? You're going to hear that police, law enforcement have been called out to that residence by several of the witnesses are going to talk about it, but at least 5 times before. Use your own common sense as you go through this. How many times have most people ever had a cop car at their house? 0. This lady's had to have cops out there at least 5 times, it sounds like. Does that sound like a good relationship to you? Absolutely not. This woman was a Navy chief petty officer. She started out with security, okay, MPs. Then she became a recruiter. But she did exactly what they tell her to do, what she was trained to do. Call the cops when you need help. That's what she did. But what did they do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Each time they came out there, they did 0. I anticipate you're going to hear testimony from Bree that she closed this garage door because she was afraid of what Colin was going to do. You're going to hear testimony from her about what this man did to her. You need to know this, and you're going to find out during this case, is that he was 100% disabled. He didn't retire from the service. He quit. He had a traumatic brain injury. He had issues with his brain. You're going to hear Bree say, you're unstable. You're a danger to the kids. This is on tape. She's saying this. So we're not talking about a normal person here. And this is the dynamics that was happening there. He didn't do anything. He was supposed to be at home studying. All he did is stay in his room all the time. These kids were running out there by themselves. You'll hear testimony from Bree. They weren't clothed properly. They weren't fed properly. The house was a wreck. This guy was in his room, in his own little world the entire time. This woman was out. You're going to hear testimony. She would work from like 7 o'clock in the morning sometimes till 1 o'clock in the morning the next day to try to make ends meet. He wasn't doing squat. She was the breadwinner, and all she got from him was abuse. Mental abuse, physical abuse. She got raped repeatedly. They were stationed in North Carolina. She was raped up there when she was up there. And when they got back here to Florida, she got raped again. And that's going to come into play when you hear from Dr. Harper. What people do after repeated abuse over and over and over again. And when she tried to call law enforcement to help, they didn't do anything. What the prosecutor conveniently forgot to tell you is that this man kept guns on him at all times. That day, the day of the incident, he had guns in the truck he was going to take these kids out with. He had threatened to kill these kids before, and her as well. This was his 3rd marriage, okay? You're going to hear testimony that every one of them happened to be red-haired. That he had told her that this marriage is not going to end unless it's going to end the way he wanted it to end. That's what this woman was worried about. That's the testimony you're going to hear. She was worried that he was going to take the kids and kill them, and her as well as we're going down. Let's all go down together. This is not a normal man she was dealing with. The question's going to come, the testimony's going to be, how far do you have to go before you let somebody hurt you or your children? How far does a mother allow someone to terrify her, threaten to kill her children before she takes action? This man told the cops on one of the conversations, "I've got guns in my car." So there's absolutely no doubt that he had guns in that car. She knew it. He was going to take those kids and do God knows what with them. There was already 2 trips out to that house before the incident ever happened, and not a dang thing was done. That's the testimony you're going to hear. Not a dang thing was done. Now, just because the testimony is going to be that she got pushed to the floor, she got slammed into the wall, well, there was no marks. The testimony is going to be, you don't have to have marks to get hurt, okay? You don't have to get marks to be threatened. You don't have to get marks to take your kids and kill your kids. This is not, the testimony's going to, this is not an ordinary Joe out there that we're dealing with, okay? This man had 100% disability for brain problems, TBI, traumatic brain injury. That's what you're going to hear. You're also going to hear in this call that this man claimed that she was trying to break his arm. Well, you're not going to hear any testimony whatsoever from this medical examiner there was anything wrong with this man's arm. This is another one of the lies that this guy's perpetrated throughout the entire...
Gonna maybe approach.
May.
You'll make the final decision, okay, as to who's telling the truth. You're also going to find out from the medical examiner that this man had amphetamines in his system. Well,
You want to maybe approach again?
May.
you're going to hear are you ready? I'm sorry. You're going to hear testimony that you can't lock somebody in a garage. Okay? It's not possible. What you're also going to hear is that this man snatched her baby girl out of her arms to take her to the truck where his guns were. Every single witness you're going to hear that were there at the day, both the neighbors that are going to testify to you, as well as law enforcement, are going to tell you this woman was in shock. Absolutely, and understandably so. And as we go through the testimony, please look at that in relation to the battered spouse syndrome that Dr. Harper's going to talk about. and some of the trauma that's happened to her since early childhood until now, what she's gone through. Because you'll see, when we get to the closing jury instructions, you got to see one of the things you have to do, the analysis you got to go through is what she thought at the time. Not what y'all thought, not what I thought, not what he thought, what going through her mind when she made the decision to shoot him.
You want to maybe approach?
As I said, every witness that you're going to hear, both law enforcement and lay witnesses, are going to tell you that Bree was in shock that day. You're going to hear that Bree asked Deputy Metzler and Major Brinkman as well, is he alive? They even had EMS check on her because she was in shock. You're going to hear she made the statement, hopefully, I just shot him, he's not dead. Bree also asked Major Brinkman, please tell me he's still alive. Now, her brother's going to come up here tomorrow and testify that she was on the phone with him. And he's going to testify that during the conversation, it sounded like she was being assaulted. Okay, once again, that's consistent with exactly what she told Dr. Harper and what she's going to tell you tomorrow as well. Her brother Eric's also going to tell you that Bree was afraid for the children's safety and that Colin had threatened to kill the children before. He also is going to testify that he knew Colin, he recognized his voice over the phone, and Bree told him that he was hitting her. She was getting hit. Now, one of these videos that the prosecutor alluded to, you're going to hear and see Bree tell you this, okay? You'll be able to see this. This is not good for the kids. Once again, Mama Bear taking care of her cubs. This is not good for the kids. Can we stop this and talk about it? I want you to leave the house. You are unstable. I don't trust you with the kids. You're on disability for being unstable. This is the testimony you're going to hear. This is the type of man we're talking about. Now, in addition, you're going to hear testimony from law enforcement that Bree told them exactly where that firearm was. She didn't try to hide it. She didn't try to run. She didn't try to flee. What she did is took the kids to the neighbor for safety and came back and spoke to 911. She didn't try to jump in the car and run or anything else. She didn't have anything to run from. That's what her testimony is going to be. She did what she thought she had to do to protect herself and protect her children. She related the fear to her brother Eric of what Colin was capable of doing to her children. She'd been slammed against the wall that day, punched on the day of the incident, was being hit again by Colin when she was talking to Eric. She's going to testify about the abuse she suffered at this man's hands for the 3 years they were together, which included domestic violence, battery, multiple rapes. I want you to remember the things that we spoke about yesterday about the burden of proof which remains with the prosecution. after you've had the opportunity to hear our witnesses, to hear our side of the story. And that's what we're asking you to do. Keep your mind open, please, until we get to the end, okay? Have you heard Mr. Barnes go through direct testimony? Listen to the prosecution's rebuttal. Finally, it'll be your chance to do your job. Okay, you don't have to listen to us up here anymore. But if you follow the law, if you follow the rules, the instructions that the judge is going to give, there's absolutely no doubt what your verdict's going to have to be. Because remember, you can't probably find her guilty more likely than not. If I had to guess, if I had to bet, Etheridge, if I had to flip a coin, no, you got to be convinced beyond to exclusion of every reasonable doubt. And ladies and gentlemen, we've got reasonable doubt all over this courtroom today through the rest of the week. You're going to hear it. You're going to see it. I'm going to ask you to do the right thing, follow the law, and vote not guilty. Thank you.